We now have time to open the floor for questions and answers. And I'll take 3 for the beginning, and then we'll go to the panelists and then come back to the floor. We have until 12:45, I think. Sorry? A little more than that. Okay, we'll be flexible. So I think we didn't get much chance this morning, so here's your chance. And please put your hand up. Please tell us who you are and keep your question brief, please. I've got one in the back.
My name is Sam Ignarski. I publish an e-zine called the Maritime Advocate. And I'm interested in the speaker on international bribery. I've always been puzzled by this. Maybe she has the answer. If I'm deemed to have been woefully short of ethical standard by paying a bribe, I understand how that happens. What I don't often understand is that the briber who's been shaken down for money is penalized, and the person that solicited the bribe seems to shuffle off in the story. That's the prerogative of power. You can demand a bribe, but in the end it's somebody in some tendering company that's held liable for paying it. Does your movement support the idea that the bribe solicitor is also penalized in this story? Because it seems to me the story's always about the person that was shaken down to pay the bribe. Because I've had bribes solicited from me. I mean, I walk out, but I always think, well, this is an abuse of power. This is somebody, in a position of power who's abusing it, and the international response is to make sure that they penalise me if I pay it.
Okay, we'll get into international regimes. Who else? I have a question. I've got one here. Why don't you wait for the microphone, because I know from sitting in the back that they won't hear you. There we go. And if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Terry Slave, and I'm editor of Ethical Corporation.
Okay.
I just want to ask you how big an element recruitment is, the whole recruitment industry in human slavery and the bribery corruption piece. And how you mentioned, I think Phil mentioned some companies that have been taking some action on this.
Okay. And Ethical Corp is a magazine that addresses a lot of these issues for anybody who doesn't know in the sector. Okay. I've got one here, and then I'll come back to the panelists, and then we'll come back. We have plenty of time, so...
Question to Conrad Thorpe. I'm Yahya Nazru, barrister at law in Mauritius, one of the flags out of the 6, so that people can identify to get the coffee. You speak in your presentation of observation and enforcement of human rights for pirates. I have been able, I take it as a privilege, to appear for one Somalian pirate for a first trial in Mauritius, which started in 2013 and ended in 2016. He was arrested on a skiff by the USS Halliburton, Americans. He was transferred to Le Surcouf naval vessel, French. He was thereafter transferred to a UK vessel and brought to Mauritius for his trial. He was acquitted in a first trial. There was an appeal. He was convicted in a second trial, which ended in 2016. He was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. On the day of the sentence, he had served an extra 64 days already because of the legislation in Mauritius, which meant that he had a 1/3 remission plus time spent on remand, so that he was free on the day he was sentenced. He is still in Mauritius being detained because the UNODC did not have any transfer program back to Somalia following punishment. And we are still awaiting for them to freight a special charter to bring those 12 Somalian, now convicted pirates, back to Somalia. So how do you reconcile all that I have just said with the protection and observation of human rights for those pirates? And let me just add, before I conclude, he was found on a skiff, but was never identified by anybody from the ship which was allegedly attacked. So we will not go into trial proper, but I'd like to have an answer from you on that.
Okay, thank you. I think Libby, Alexandra, I'll turn the first question over to you.
I do think I have the answer. It's just not very satisfying. The government officials who shake people down, the petty bureaucrats at ports and customs officials and that sort of thing, they tend to be very entrepreneurial. They tend to be self-starters, but they are also, as representatives of the government, protected by sovereign immunity. So the Department of Justice in the United States can go after American citizens or anybody who advances a bribery scheme in the United States. The UK SFO can go after British citizens, but their jurisdiction stops at the border. So what we depend on, and you'll see the humor in this, what we depend on is the government of which that extortionate official is a member is responsible for ensuring that he's brought to justice. And in countries with the greatest levels of bribery, of course, you can just pay off the police or pay off the judge and buy your way out of it, and it ends up being this sort of colossal pyramid scheme where you just have to pay the government officials who are more senior, and then you are left to go. But as overreaching and frequently accused of policing the world as the US FBI is, they cannot go into a country and start arresting that country's government officials.
But I think that's where these initiatives at the country level come in, right? And as you were saying, Alexandra, to raise the whole issue and address it from the bottom up in the country.
Which is fantastic for countries with rule of law,
Yeah.
but countries with rule of law don't generally have high levels of corruption, and so you have the most egregious behavior happening in countries where the government has no interest in enforcing it because they're just letting everybody at the trough to take their share.
Okay, do you want to address about recruitment? Was that, I assume that was about recruitment in this industry? Recruitment in this industry? Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah, it seems to me that as pressing bodies, they're trying to actually place upon the world a construct of good behaviour and good laws and so on. That should be a concomitant of your activities, not to say, well, our law agencies have their limits, but to say, well, part of the price to pay, Mr. Emergent Country and Mr. Emergent Port, is you get down to the business of stopping your officials from extorting money from the international business community.
Yeah, let me be clear. I mean, I think it's egregious and awful. We are a business association, so our members are corporations, and that's who we have access to. There are other organizations, Transparency International and others, who are working much more on that government-to-government level, and we take every opportunity to embarrass government officials who behave like that, and to we publish reports on which countries have the most egregious bad actors and that sort of thing. So I'm in complete agreement. It's just that the world is large and corruption is rampant, and there's only so much we can do.
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe that's a good lunchtime discussion for the next 10 years. Recruitment, do you want to?
Yeah, just briefly. I think one of the key aspects here is that there is a continuum between recruitment agencies and human trafficking. There's clearly a large number of companies that are recruitment agencies that want to do the right thing and are making significant advances now to really clean up a lot of their operations. But inevitably there is a continuum through to those who are deliberately going where there are distressed and vulnerable people and seeking those people in order to traffic them into supply chains where a large amount of profit can be made from their labour and from the supply of those people at very cheap rates. And that's just the reality of every industry. And I think what's important for the maritime industry is to know that your recruiters are often the same recruiters that are being used by many other sectors. So also learning from those other sectors. For instance, both our organisations do a lot on recruitment into the construction industry in the Gulf, particularly around Qatar and the other Gulf countries. That's all about Nepalese and Bangladeshi workers being brought in. There are recruitment agencies there that act with a great deal of of moral probity and seek to do the right thing. But there are those who are regularly demanding enormous recruitment fees. Immediately that rings alarm bells. They are confiscating passports, and then they are passing them on to employers who naturally hold back wages, take the passports as well, and confiscate the passports alongside the recruitment people. So it's that continuum that is there. What we need is a clear set of guidelines for the recruitment, for the maritime industry, which shares recruiters with many other different sectors.
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the fishing sector, this has become an issue globally, and that's why within the Responsible Fishing Scheme, when it looks at crew safety and welfare, a major component of that is making sure that people are there legally, they have been brought in, they do have the right to work, they do have the right paperwork, proof that they are being paid, that they can get their passport if they want their passport. So that has certainly been a big driver for change in the seafood sector.
Okay, and I'll just add to that discussion in terms of Phil was talking about the companies operating, but also the actions operating. But I think it's also then relevant to talk about the standards. And ILO does actually have, there is an ILO convention, the number of which I forget, but it's about recruitment agencies. And that actual international standard is, in fact, that employers should pay the fee for recruiting workers. And we are involved, and Phil referred to it, of a whole initiative where very large companies are now making that commitment to pay the fee, the recruitment fee, because of the close linkage between payment of exorbitant fees by workers and getting themselves into bonded labor, forced labor circumstances. And there are whole industry associations, the Electronic Industry Corporate Coalition, Corporate Responsibility, EICC, has made a commitment on behalf of that whole enormous industry that, in fact, employers in that industry will pay the wages of workers who are recruited in, because, again, in many industries, we increasingly see the increase in temporary workers. And so that's, again, another reason that there's a focus on it. Increase in temporary workers, increase in fees. So you've got this big focus on these issues, and again, there are these tools now and standards coming out to address. So then I'm going to turn to Conrad on the piracy issue.
Thank you, Margaret. I didn't get your name, sorry. Yahya. Thank you. I think you totally misinterpreted the human rights that I was directing. I think it was a gross failure on the shipping company's behalf not to provide adequate training and protection for their crews on those vessels, which then resulted in those crews being captured, in some cases tortured. Notwithstanding that, as you've already pointed out, the pirates do have human rights as well. I'm pleased to see you managed to jail one in Mauritius. Congratulations. There's several thousand still at large. And I'm not saying that slightly conceited, I apologize, but the fact is, we haven't put enough of these men behind bars for the crimes that they committed. And I think you'll find exactly the same problem in Nigeria today. They have been far more successful in Southeast Asia. The program that's been run out there through RECAP, as you probably are aware or not aware, has been hugely successful in apprehending and catching these men and locking them away. If I may just comment really on the aspect of options available to ship owners, managers and so forth in relation to a vessel being taken. Back in the dark years between 08 or 07, 2007 through to 2012, vessels were taken in considerable numbers of Somalia. In order to release those vessels, there were two options available. You either are able to put together a coalition which agrees that special forces, and by this I mean Tier 1 special forces, from the military, of which I was a part in a former day, are able to go in and release those men in a highly complex situation, men who are used to working on ships, understand all of the issues of bulkheads and the ability for ammunition and so forth to pass through those bulkheads and to cause considerable damage, and of course save those crews and hopefully apprehend those hostages. Very difficult when you've got a flag state with a particular flag, a captain from a particular country, chief officer from another country, crewmen from other countries, engineers. I hope you're getting the picture, in waters off Somalia or wherever else it might be, hugely complicated. Therefore, putting in those Tier 1 special forces is not going to happen. The next alternative is to engage a company like ours in order to facilitate and provide the logistical support that will go in there to release those individuals, to take fuel, to take water, to take food, to take medical supplies, to do everything that's required in order to get those seamen back on their feet and give them the immediate help they need. Those are your choices. There's no sides for me. It's a tragedy at sea. It should never have taken place. I did warn Mauritius when I was in Port Louis that you had pirates on board a vessel no more than 200 nautical miles at that time from your beautiful islands. But at that time, no ships were put to sea to deter those pirates back in about 2010. I hope I've in part answered your question. I think you misinterpreted where I was coming from.
Yeah, just one point. I think it's a reminder of both sides of the human rights equation, as there are humans, the rights of defendants, and on the other hand, the rights of those who have been affected.
The issue that I've raised is as you said, Margaret,
Quickly.
it's both sides. Not only the shipping companies who have their people being detained by pirates. We are all aware of that. That's fine. But if we talk human rights at sea, it must work both ways.
Of course.
And my observation / question was there enough being done for those Somalian youngsters who would have been brought on a ship just to follow those who are leading them once they've been convicted and need to go back to a life in Somalia? Would those shipping companies contribute back in some form to their human rights being preserved despite their attacks or alleged attacks? That was the purport of the question.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that that's a discussion for lunchtime. In terms, I think it's a very clear point to put on the agenda and particularly legitimate, but I think addressing Somalia's issues and root causes, which clearly are at the heart of both this and the same thing with the migration discussion, is a long-term discussion for the industry. But thank you for putting it on the agenda. I think that's very good. But I've got a couple of other questions right behind you.
Sorry, my name is Matthew Cox. I'm from North Atlantic Fishing Company, but my question isn't relating to fishing,
Okay.
so Libby, you can sit back. This is actually directed to Phil. I was listening very interested to your description of the shipbreaking industry on my previous experiences with shipping companies. And it seems to me that we're very guilty here in the West of sitting back in our comfortable chairs and our comfortable lifestyle and laying accusations and quite rightly pointing out the inadequacies of human rights within shipbreaking yards. Ships on the beach, people climbing over with bare feet and blow torches, everybody would agree that's completely unacceptable. But that's from a very Western perspective. And you mentioned this Pakistani shipyard employs 15,000 people, or Bangladeshi shipyard. Those people would not have incomes if the shipyard didn't employ them. I would like to ask Phil, how far do you think a business would get if the ship owner would pay the shipyard to actually dispose of what is effectively Western waste? So the ship owner pays rather than receives money per lightweight ton for his ship. Then the shipyard could ethically break up that ship, pay its employees a fair wage, invest in medical services for their employees, look after their families with schools. I put it to you that shipyard would not even get off the ground by our Western standards.
Okay. I've got a question here.
Hello, my name is Nelfa Hidayat. I'm from Lightbox Media, and we're currently developing a documentary that is looking at kind of slavery and human rights at sea. My question is, as journalists and as documentary filmmakers, obviously this is something that we want to cover. It's slightly different because of the costs involved in trying to cover a story that basically is about the oceans and the sea. But what responsibility do we have, and how can we take on this challenge of actually covering the story, covering these developments. I mean, you mentioned the AP and the Guardian investigations, both of which were just really important. It's why we're here, really. But how do we enact that responsibility that we have to show these human rights violations to the wider world? And how can we best do it? Because we can't do it without your help. And at the same time, I know that a lot of NGOs and charities and organisations are hesitant because, well, journalists have a bad rap for looking at the top line and nothing else. But as documentary filmmakers, I mean, what can we do and how can we do it?
Okay. Do I have one more? Over in the back here?
Yes, I don't. Yeah, okay. Sorry, my name is Darren Reeves. I'm with Romeo Dallaire Child Soldiers Initiative. My question is primarily for Conrad, but I'd invite all of you to weigh in. With regards to piracy at sea, our research indicates approximately 20% of pirates are in fact children when they're conducting these acts, or they're part of the piracy action groups. What, if any, training do your security personnel receive in the identification and then care of children that are taken, detained, and subsequently passed along interned? And I would extend that, or invite the rest of the panel to weigh in on that question with regards to the special rights that are owed to children under international law vis-a-vis the other areas, industry areas and practices that you have all discussed. What, if any, special provisions have been made to try to protect these most vulnerable individuals?
Okay. So I'm going to go to Phil on the shipbreaking, Lisa on the media. Please.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think, you've heard from the panel today a whole, what I thought was quite a eloquent set of examples about the way in which this isn't about demonizing one particular company or one particular place. It's about the solution, the whole supply chain coming together to find solutions to the fact that you've got hundreds of people dying in industrial accidents in the shipbreaking yards, which are frankly unnecessary. There is no reason why those people are dying. We used to say in the UK construction industry and in the UK mining industry, well, there's just a lot. It's a very dangerous industry. You know what? We can't do anything about it. And now that's no longer tolerable. Now, I'm not suggesting we're going to go overnight from the very high levels of health and safety that you might find in some of the London construction sites and transpose that directly in. It's going to be a long haul. But the fact is that we shouldn't be tolerating those kind of situations. It's not going to happen. It will happen slowly because of the goodwill of a lot of different people in the supply chain, and because of government regulation, and because of some exposure by good journalists and by civil society organisations. That's what will happen over time. We've got a big opportunity. We have the Hong Kong and the EU ship recycling regulations that are there, and those should be applied and enhanced. And we also have this whole generation of cruise ships that are coming through, where if the industry got together now and said, hang on, we're going to be breaking those ships up in the next 10 years, how do we make sure that we don't kill a heck of a lot of South Asians in the process of doing that unnecessarily? That would be an enormous contribution, I think, to the welfare of workers. That's going to take a lot of trade union activity, and unfortunately at the moment in those shipyards, those trade union organisations are repressed and people who demonstrate get shot, as I illustrated. We need all that group to come together to make those solutions. It's not about saying, oh, why are you demonising a particular shipyard in South Asia? That was not my intent.
Okay. Lisa?
Yes, so it might be helpful if I just very quickly explain why I'm on the panel, and I don't know very much about maritime and human rights, but I work for a law firm.
Oh, your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yeah, it might be just useful if I give 2 minutes and explain why I'm on the panel, given that, you know, this sector isn't my background. I work for a law firm called Mishcon de Reya, just based around the corner, actually, and we have a very, very strong social impact programme at the law firm. And I was really struck just listening to the conversation, and I wrote 2 things down. The first one, Conrad, it's something that you said. We have a strong social impact programme because we do what is right and we do what we can. And I think that sentiment, the more we can get that sentiment across in business, the more successful we'll be in collaborating. And I'll come to your point about the media and what you can do to help. And I was also really struck with your introduction at the beginning. On your PowerPoint, Margaret, you had 3 planks, which was the business's impact on people, so the nature of the business, what happens, the business's impact on the local community, and a business's impact on employers. And the legal sector is completely different. We are not dealing with the kind of issues that you guys face every day. And for us, it's very simple. We don't need to do anything, but we do things because we do what's right and we do what we can. And actually, if you look at the legal sector and how we've evolved over the years, and I think I can speak on behalf of, you know, a very strong social impact CSR background across London with the law firms, you can make a lot of difference if you work together, you share ideas, and you're not competitive about doing good. You're doing good things to achieve things for society, not just for the individual branding or reputation of the business. And if I just touch on some of the things that we've done, some of the things we've had credit for, other times not. We worked on a huge whistleblowing case a couple of years ago that went to the Supreme Court. That was to protect people in LLPs who often see corruption and bribery at the highest level, but there was a little glitch in the law that meant those people couldn't come forward and tell the truth. If that didn't exist, would we have more exposure of things that go wrong within the corporate setting? I think we would. We were successful. We won that. So that piece of the law that would stop people within partnerships, so I'm talking about lawyers and accountants coming forward to blow the whistle. So, you know, you can do small things in any business that can have a big impact. We're currently working on a case for the Dalit Solidarity Network to change a piece of law, the Equalities Act, to outlaw the caste discrimination system in the UK. We're working on a big case at the moment on behalf of a group of clients about how the process of leaving Europe, Article 50 is triggered because we believe that's taking away human rights of UK citizens, and we have a group of clients that have asked us to work on that again on a pro bono basis. So I think whilst, you know, the scale of the problems are very different, what's really clear to me is that if you go into everything in business with an attitude, do what is right and do what you can actually have a big impact. I think in this area in particular, it's very important to share experience, work together and not be competitive in that sense. And you can go a long way by doing that. And back to your point about the media, I know it's a very long answer, but I felt I should justify why I'm sitting here in the first place. I think it is really important to think about how these issues can be highlighted. So one of the things that we do when we look at pro bono work and which legal cases we take on, we look at the media angle and work out how you can, sometimes it's not just the legal case, you can win a legal case but still lose the public argument. So finding those human stories, collaborating with people so you can get to the actual heart of the matter. And I agree, journalists sometimes are very annoying, and I see that from running the PR team at Mishcon in many ways. But actually, you know, I genuinely think the role that media can play in highlighting issues, actually forcing a group of people to work together in a better way, can actually drive better outcomes for what you want to achieve. So that's a very long answer to a quick question.
Okay, quickly, Libby, and then I'll go to Conrad. Thank you. Thank you.
There have been a few films already produced. They've been done but collaboratively making sure they have people on the ground at a local level. And sometimes it reaches the point where we get constant stories, and it's back to that, when did the public start to switch off because they've seen it? The slavery one, the slavery at sea, the Thailand one, it's been trotted out so many times. Talking to one of the filmmakers, we were looking at an angle, could you then have something positive? Because you're going to beat the same people over the head with a stick. I mentioned the Costco case. Costco have been doing loads in Southeast Asia, but they're the ones that get it in the press. They're easy to hit with a stick. It's the small people that are doing it surreptitiously. So I'm not always... I think it's been a story that's come out a lot. Over the last few years, that's all we've heard. And I think something is being done. If you produce the same thing, then that story's already been covered. There is a lot going on to address it, and I think that would be a more interesting angle.
Okay, I'll come to Conrad.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Was it Roman?
No, I work for Romeo Dallaire.
Oh, Romeo Dallaire, my apologies. And thanks for the question. I just want to be absolutely clear. I'm no longer a member of law enforcement. I do not have the authority, neither the powers in any capacity, apart from a civilian arrest, to make any arrest of any pirates at any point. That was not our duties. That was not our job. In relation to the children, certainly the pirates that I have come across, there are some young ones, but I'll be honest with you, most of these were young men, and there were a lot of older men as well. Of course, I think there was a proliferation of what took place. The individuals that we've got are all ex-military. They have been trained in law. We routinely to undertake legal training at our headquarters. We are members of the UN Global Compact. We are adherents to VPSHR and so forth. So all of these protocols are followed by our company. But I think if you're looking for more detail on child pirates and stuff, you'll have to look elsewhere. I will recount one unfortunate story. I was on board the vessel, and there was a particularly aggressive group of pirates on that vessel, more than 40 pirates on that vessel, extremely heavily armed. And their firefight ensued on the vessel. A huge exchange of automatic weapons, you can imagine, lots of metal, everything rattling around. And this is broad daylight, it's about 5 o'clock in the evening. And one of the individuals was shot, and quite badly, and there was an awful lot of blood. Two things, of course, I won't tell you what raced through my mind. Perhaps not the best for this audience, maybe over a glass of wine. But I immediately got hold of my medic, and we fixed him. He was a pirate. And they were about to disembark from this vessel where they treated the crew particularly badly. So we saved his life, and we were fortunate enough to get him off the vessel in a stretcher, and then he was taken ashore for medical help, which is not close by. It's over 300 kilometers by land, over road, on horrendous roads. Whether he lived or not, I'm not sure. But certainly his first aid and his basic treatment, we got a line into him, and of course we stemmed the flow of blood. What I didn't want was that pirate on board the vessel, because we would have had another individual, which would have further complicated matters considerably to where we were going. So I think it's kind of a story that's just one of the difficulties of that sort of business I wanted to share with you.
Okay, thank you. It does highlight the challenge of bringing, as a former UNICEF staff, of bringing child rights standards to the whole discussion around armed conflict. And I think, again, there's probably lessons that can be transferred from, and I'm sure that's what you're doing, from dealing with these issues on land to dealing with them on sea. David, do we have some more time for more questions, or is that it? 5 minutes. So do I have any more quick questions in the audience? I have one here, and there was, yeah, okay, so I'll take these two, if I may.
Hello, Stephen Spark from Nautical Institute, but also freelance journalist. This is really for Conrad. Have you found that there's a relationship between the pirates or ex-pirates, temporarily ex-pirates perhaps, and other forms of maritime illegality in that region, such as human trafficking? For example, there was a Somali, at least one Somali was found to be involved in the Mediterranean migrant smuggling business. Also arms and drug smuggling and so on. Have you seen anything like that?
Okay. And there was another question over here.
Alex Channer from Veris Maplecroft. I just wondered, could you elaborate on who is actually accountable or responsible for the human rights of seafarers that ship our goods? So, for example, if I'm importing, I don't know, televisions by sea, and I'm a company and I want to guarantee that those workers have been treated correctly, who do I go to find out? Is it the ship captain, the ship owner, the company that's chartered the ship, the company that's recruited the crew? Who's ultimately responsible? Thank you.
Okay. Do I have any more last very short questions? Okay, there was one. He was first, way in the back. Sorry. Then you get to ask at lunch. Can we just get the microphone way in the back?
Back row.
Back row. Put your hand up, please. Yeah, there you go. Briefly.
It's on.
It's on. Go.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
it's on.
Sorry. I'm Captain Parashar. I'm from Mumbai.
Okay.
I have only one question. There are more than 500 seafarers in various jails, and couple of them are just 10 days, 15 days on the ship, and on some charges they have been put inside the jail. They have spent more than 4 years, 5 years, and the governments are deliberating, but nothing happens. So is any mechanism being done for those kind of people also? They are generally 18 to 20 years old. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, pirates, I think, Conrad, that was to you, the links between pirates and other kinds of crimes, human trafficking, running arms and drugs, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, it is not my job to be investigating what else is taking place. But I'm in an industry which has enormous exposure of illicit activity, and we see what's taking place. Just as in Somalia, one of the things you didn't mention was the illegal movement of charcoal from a very diminished forest in southern Somalia, which is all moving into wealthy Middle Eastern countries, where it is, of course, used to cook barbecues on weekends and so forth. Just as that is happening, so is illegal oil bunkering in Nigeria, with pirates getting into both of those illegal activities, and criminality spreads across everything, including illegal unregulated fishing, which takes place primarily off the Horn of Africa, more so than off West Africa, for example. Involvement in the narcotics trade, particularly hard drugs, both in heroin and cocaine, and we've seen a significant increase in cocaine coming into the eastern seaboard, where historically it has been going into West Africa. It's now coming into East Africa as well. And of course the movement of people, which you've already mentioned, not just across the Mediterranean into Europe, but across the Red Sea and into the Arabian Peninsula. And I was on a road in northern Somalia where there were literally hundreds of Oromo tribesmen. Oromo are southern Ethiopians making their way on that road to the port of Lascaux in Puntland, where they would board vessels and then move across the 200 nautical miles of the Gulf of Aden and into Yemen, and from there across into Saudi and so on. And finally, on weapons and arms, incredible amount of weapons movements, particularly from countries which have recently collapsed, such as Libya, which are being brought in to prosecute wars in those difficult areas of the Horn. So yes, it is taking place, and whether they're involved, I would say absolutely yes. Do I have evidence of it? No. Finger in the air, is it happening? 1 out of 10? 10. Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we had two then further questions. One was about who's responsible when items or goods are being imported. I think that is then for the next panel, if I may, that are talking about seafarers. I'm going to ask Libby, if she can, to answer it with respect to fish products and sea products. And then there was the question again about criminalizing seafarers. And again, there was a reference to that this morning. I think, where is Captain Szymanski? Where did he? Yes, I think that's a question perhaps to discuss at lunchtime, but I also would put that on the panel for this afternoon. We have the next panel is on the Maritime Welfare. So I think, again, I'll bump that, if I may, to this afternoon's panel. And I'm just going to give the last point to Libby on seafood products.
In terms of transparency in your supply chain, so you need to know, there'd be an onus on you to know where your seafood product come from, and that's where it's become very difficult because it's such a fragmented supply chain. So it's not simply making a television, putting it on a ship and bringing it over. It could come from thousands of different boats. In terms of the Modern Slavery Act, then people need to understand their supply chains and make sure that there are no labour abuse issues within that. So it's putting onus on your suppliers to make sure that their supplies are transparent. But overall, if you're importing fish into the UK, for example, and it's ending up on someone's plate, then you do need to have transparency in that supply chain to try and understand where every single piece of fish has come from. Very, very difficult when you get down to something like seafood.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think it's a one to keep thinking about throughout the whole day in terms of responsibility. David, can I look to you for directions on where we're going for lunch? Thank you. If we can give a round of applause to the panelists.